Hey, it's Elizabeth D'Alto, and this is the Untame the Wild Soul podcast. From body image, sex, spirituality, money and relationships, to motherhood, creativity, business, communication, and desire, Untame the Wild Soul is the place to come for real stories and powerful advice to help you reclaim and redefine womanhood in the 21st century. What's up, wild ones? Welcome to episode number 189 of the Untame the Wild Soul podcast. This is a solo episode today, and I am not going to be on camera because, straight up, I feel tired and exhausted, and I have actually written out a lot of what I'm going to be sharing in this episode, and it just feels easier, gentler, and kinder to my own system to just be off camera for this one. So that's what we're going to do. And before we dive into today's episode, I want to let you know about something we recently put out into the world that is in direct response to what many of you have told me you want. It is called the Wild Soul Toolkit, and it's over a dozen practices, rituals, and meditations to navigate everyday life. So basically, not everyone wants or needs a whole course or program. And I get more and more requests for go-to practices, rituals, meditations, and things like that to apply to specific day-to-day situations. So this is exactly what you get in the Wild Soul Toolkit. Self-care is always urgent. It's like thirst. If you're thirsty, you're already dehydrated. Likewise, if you feel like you need self-care, you're already depleted. So for a long time, I've been observing this self-care movement, right? Self-care is not an uncommon topic anymore. And where I see self-care practices falling short is where they only hit the surface. They are like putting Band-Aids on bullet wounds. They're not necessarily helping you be replenished, be more resilient, or navigate your everyday life with more effectiveness or proficiency. So think of the Wild Soul Toolkit as next level self-care, wild soul care, if you will. So these tools are built to help you go beyond the surface of basic self-care and nourish your entire being. So there's the updated and ever-evolving yes-no truth practice, a practice for general presence, 2 practices to mindfully nourish your body with food. 1 around choosing foods, 1 around how you actually consume your foods. There's a practice for energizing a new endeavor, closing something out in your life. There's a new morning practice, an evening practice, and an expansion and receptivity practice. For the rituals, I have a full moon and a new moon ritual. And then there's some meditations and bonuses. There's a meditation for divine protection that you could use daily. I especially created this one with my fellow empaths and sensitive people in mind to help you go out into the world and not constantly feel assaulted by everything that's going on around you. There's a meditation for connecting to your wild soul. There's a bonus PDF guide for honoring cycles, seasons, and the elements of your body and the earth. Some bonus videos, everyday practices for energy hygiene. And I will just be adding more bonus content, sporadic surprise content. And you'll get access to all that stuff. So you can head on over to wildsoulmovement.com/toolkit. And if you're listening to this in real time, we're also donating 10% of all sales in the month of September to vetted grassroots Hurricane Harvey relief efforts. I'm also going to personally match whatever that 10% is. And in the beginning of October, we'll post on social media and let you know what that total was and where we sent the money. So check that out if that sounds interesting to you. And now for today's show, this is a little different. We recently switched up our platform that we host our interviews on. And in forgetting that, I accidentally deleted the interview that was scheduled to go up today. It was a great interview with my friend Jill Wesley. We're going to redo it, which I'm super excited and grateful that she was willing to do that and has the time. And so I was kind of left with needing an episode for today. And I asked, by the way, thank you for those of you who chimed in on Instagram and Facebook. I did some live videos requesting, what do you want to hear about? And I got a ton of responses, and what I decided to do, which really encompassed a lot of those responses that you all sent in, was to do an episode called 33 Lessons from My 33rd Year. The last year of my life has been a hell of a friggin' year. I feel like it's been like 10 or more years worth of like growth, awakening, healing, transformation, realizations. And some of it I've been sharing as I went along. A lot of it I've kept to myself to just honor my own process. But there's so much that I'm completing around, that I've moved through, that I've let go of, that I'm totally comfortable and ready to share with you all. And so as I press record on this, I'm aware that it actually might go longer than a normal episode. And if that's the case, we'll break it into 2 episodes. So this might be it, or it might be a to be continued, and I won't know until the end. So buckle up, y'all. Here we go. I first want to share that much of my last year revolved around healing from getting out of an emotionally abusive relationship with a very narcissistic person, and also unraveling from my own codependent patterns and habits and tendencies, which many of you have heard me talk about that. I talked about that in our episode with Terry Cole. It's come up in a number of our episodes about relationships this year. And so the bits I've revealed about this story over the last year have been according to what felt right and considerate of my own healing. I was also being considerate of my former partner, not having a desire to create any drama or unnecessary energy, not wanting to throw this person under the bus. And so I've kept some of the details vague. And I know some of you, I've gotten private messages. Some of you knew exactly what I was friggin' talking about. That relationship was very public. And some of you have no idea who I'm talking about. And it doesn't matter. And this is part of, when we talk about reclaiming and redefining on this show, reclaiming is such a huge, huge part of it. One of the things that I've learned a lot about this year is how we internalize our own oppression. And so something that no longer feels like right or true to me or an integrity is to protect a person who doesn't deserve to be protected, or to hold back pieces of my story to be considerate of a person who really was not really very considerate of me ever. And I think we all do that a lot in our lives. We go above and beyond for people who simply are not doing the same for us. And so I'm pretty done with that. Now, the other thing is, this entire thing isn't going to be about that or about that relationship, but it would be just incomplete of me to not be honest about how much of my last year has really centered around healing from some PTSD, from some real stuff that I didn't know, and it was a lot. It was a lot. So I'm going to bounce around. That'll come up, and there's also just so many things. And some of these things were more remembering. Some of these things were deepening into seeds that had been planted long ago or within recent history of my own and like the world. And so lesson number 1 from my 33rd year, and this is a more recently relevant lesson, and that is that white supremacy is real and it's everywhere. I learned how I benefit from the privileges and unearned advantages. And I discovered for me, this is a non-negotiable part of my mission now, to address and do what I can to help dismantle all of these systems. They all feed into each other. So I know we talk about patriarchy on the podcast sometimes. And again, this isn't about, it's not about man bashing or hating. We're not here to blame men or anything like that. And a lot of these systems were really created and perpetuated by a certain population of men. And so we do get to deconstruct that. We do get to lean into that and see how and where that's happening, how we've internalized it, and also how we contribute to it. So I wrote a blog post at untameyourself.com/Charlottesville that centered around a video that Brene Brown did around this right after the events in Charlottesville, Virginia in August of 2017. So if this is something you're interested in, check that out. One of the things I love about Brene Brown, I feel like she does so well, is she helps to put language to things that a lot of us feel and see but don't necessarily know how to articulate. So that shit is real. And I'm no longer willing to not do anything about it. It's like once you see something, not all of you, for me, once I see something, once I understand something, once I see and understand the impacts, I can't ignore it. And previously, I had not necessarily seen or felt or understood the deep, deep, deep and widespread impacts. And I'm not, I'll talk about this in another point, is I personally don't waste time on shaming myself, beating myself up, or feeling myself guilty. I just get to work and I do what I can wherever I can. So lesson number 2, this was a big one, y'all. The difference between compassion and tolerance. And for those of you who heard the Martha Beck interview, which happened way last year, it's way back in the archives. I don't remember the episode number, but we'll put it in the show notes. And the show notes for this episode will be at untameyourself.com/episode -189. There'll probably be a lot of good links in show notes for this one today because I'm going to reference a lot of stuff. But I remember Martha Beck talking about her integrity cleanse, talking about being at dinner with Byron Katie, who's like the queen of loving what is. And Byron Katie expressed a preference. There was a fan hitting them or something, and she wanted to move the table. And Martha Beck was like, well, aren't you supposed to be okay with that fan making your spaghetti cold? And Byron Katie was like, no, I still get to have preferences. It's just a matter of how I feel about those preferences, right? And so this was largely very informative to my realization about the difference between compassion and tolerance. We can be really compassionate towards ourselves and towards others without tolerating poor, bad, dangerous, damaging, abusive behavior. I don't have to judge people. I can send them tons of love, and I don't have to have them in my life. I don't have to keep showing up and taking their abuse or their bad behavior. I don't have to be the receptacle for their whatever. And so this is about boundaries. It's about self-love. It's about treating yourself with the utmost kindness and acceptance and extending that for others while also putting your foot down, having some standards and going, listen, I can respect it. I have a ton of compassion and it's not okay with me. I'm not going to be party to this, and I'm not going to give my energy to this, and I'm not going to give my power to this. And that's an enormously self-compassionate thing that is not overly tolerant. And so that was a big, big lesson for me in the last year. Lesson number 3 is how I want to work with people and how I'm called to serve. I mean, this is always going to be ever evolving in the context of being an entrepreneur and running a business. It's helpful and useful to have a business model and to be experimenting, with new offerings, to be staying in touch with your community and knowing, what do people actually want versus what do you think they want. And in fact, in the next week or two, if you're listening in real time, we're going to send out a massive survey for you all to fill out because we are deconstructing and reconstructing this business big time over the course of the next year. And we really want to make sure that yes, I'm honoring my own creative desires and instincts, but also that we're serving the community in a way that's effective and useful and honors the different stages of your lives that you're all in. Different stages of development, of evolution, the things that you're going through, the various transitions. The other thing I've realized about how I'm called to serve is that everything I do is always going to serve the Divine Mother first and foremost. And for some of you that might resonate, for some of you that might not. I'm actually not going to elaborate on what that means, but it's a thing for me. Number 4 is my attitude, and this is related, my attitude around money, marketing, entrepreneurship, this has really changed. I am still ambitious, and my highest calling, as I mentioned, is to serve the Divine Mother in whatever way she's asking me to. And so money is amazing. I will always have what I need. And I've started to view my relationship with money like the earth. The earth only takes what she needs and is the master of using what she has. So, yes, I believe in prosperity. Yes, I believe in abundance. And I actually am a quite prosperous, abundant person in my life in terms of money and things like that. And I think there's a line between when a business just becomes a machine and when it becomes more about income than impact. And that's just never okay with me. You know, even over the course, ever since I was like 19, when I first started my first sales job, people always want you to set income goals and number goals. And it's just never resonated for me. Like, I can't even tell you guys, I've only ever hit some kind of number goal a handful of times in my life, because it's kind of like something I'll talk about in a little while, which is intent versus impact. You know, the money goal is kind of like the intention. I intend to make this much money, and it's like, great. But on a larger scale, I intend to have so much impact that the money is just going to come. I just need to keep my head down and keep doing my work. And so that feels really important to me. It feels really liberating. It feels really freeing. Like, I'm always going to have enough, and probably more than enough than I ever need. But if my focus ever shifts on to just amassing more wealth, that's always when things get funky for me. So, and it's tempting, right? I have so many friends who are entrepreneurs. People are always like, what's your goal? Where are you at for the year? What's going on? And like, those are not conversations I'm engaging in anymore. And it feels really good. So lesson number 5 is, I have a new title, y'all. I've really resisted. God, I've resisted for so long calling myself anything. You know, it's easy to call yourself a podcast host or an author when you've written a book. I can call myself the creator of Wild Soul Movement. All of these things are true. But how do I come up with a title for what I actually do? Like, there's all kinds of things that people call me. And I've resisted owning a lot of the titles people want to like give me or bestow upon me. But something I've realized recently as I've been getting more out into the world, meeting new people, you know, inevitably that question of what do you do always comes up. And I love to say something, I learned from my friend Clay Hebert to say something like, well, I help women untame themselves. And then people will say something like, ooh, what does that mean? And then I can talk more about the vastness of what I do. But still, sometimes it's just useful to have a title, like something you could put on a business card. So I resisted that for a really long time. And recently I was playing around with words. And I decided that I am an integrative spiritual counselor. And I had a friend of mine give me some unsolicited feedback that sounds boring. We need to come up with something more exciting. And I'm like, listen, it's not about boring or exciting. I don't care. What I care about is clarity. And so if I look at the definitions of these words, integrative means serving or intending to unify separate things. That is super, super true for me. Spiritual means relating to or affecting the human spirit or soul as opposed to material or physical things. Yes, super, super true. And the word counselor, I was hesitant around because typically that is bestowed upon people like licensed therapists or like board certified lawyers. But there's so many different definitions for counselor. If you look it up, especially the word counsel, right? Because that's where counselor comes from. One of the definitions of counsel is simply wisdom or prudence. It's about giving advice. It's about being an advisor, consultation, deliberation, interchange of opinions as to future procedure. And that is what I do. And so integrative spiritual counselor. It's true. It feels real. It feels specific. It feels distinct. And who knows, I might ditch it 3 months from now because that's the way my life is sometimes. But I don't think so. I think that one's here to stay because it's across the board as I continue to evolve and expand, as Wild Soul Movement continues to evolve and expand, as we build out the company in the direction that we're moving in, that is going to remain true. So nice to meet you. My name is Elizabeth D'Alto. I'm an integrative spiritual counselor. Number 6, I don't know how much I'm actually going to be able to say about this because so much of it is intangible, but huge lesson. The role space and grace really play in my life. And this clarity began in 2016 because space and grace were my words for 2016. Ironically, I didn't choose words for 2017. I was like, let's just do this thing. Let's go on this ride. So space and grace, we need space. We need to create space to make room for grace. And grace comes in. It allows for space. I'm actually debating. I'm always debating another tattoo, right? From being a person who back as recently as 2013 was like, I will never get a tattoo. I have 2 now. And nothing big or massive. I don't have a very high pain tolerance, but I'm thinking my next tattoo is really going to be to get the words miraculous grace tattooed on my left arm, because that is what I believe in above all things. If I have a religion, it's the utmost faith in miraculous grace. It's creating space. It's getting out of the way so grace can do its things and just come into my life and create miracles, things beyond my imagining. And a lot of this has been informed by Wild Soul Movement, really deepening into surrender, constantly releasing things that don't serve me, deepening into my trust and my receptivity, allowing myself to connect with my soul's desires, like my deepest desires, the things that like infinite intelligence desires through me. And therefore allowing myself to wild dream and then create. Everything we create comes from and with so much freaking love for ourselves, for you, for the planet, for our vision that we have for humanity. And, maybe we're going to hit the mark. Maybe we're not sometimes, but space and grace, really, it's like the balm. It's like the, what am I thinking of when it's like the oil. It's like the oil that lubes this machine up and keeps it running. It's our rocket fuel. Number 7, ego and identity, the trickiest of the tricksters. And for me, I feel like I'm always, and probably for you too, I think this goes for all people, but I'm sharing from personal experience here. I don't need to project my experience onto you. I am always going to be dancing, flirting, loving, and evolving with my ego and my identity together, right? I'm not fighting my ego, but I'm constantly looking at where am I identifying with my ego? What's shaping and informing that identity? And above all else, I'm not committed to my ego. I'm not committed to my identity. I'm committed to my wild soul. And what's cool, what I love is the built-in accountability of something like this, of like having a platform, having a podcast, being in a leadership role where people listen to what I say and they take it seriously. Some people value my words and my opinion, the things that I'm sharing on this show, on social media and other places. And I take that responsibility seriously. And my highest responsibility is to my wild soul. And so there are times when I need to shift or I need to pivot or I need to say something or I need to change something, correct course, maybe break a commitment, do something differently. And I know that some of you will be disappointed. Most recent example was archiving our private Facebook group. There's a lot of you who that was like your favorite space. That was your safe space. And when it became clear to me that it was time to archive that, which just means closing it down on an ongoing basis and only opening it for specific and intentional periods of time focused around, an initiative or an experience or a training or something that makes sense. that that's what I need to do. I knew I would be disappointing a lot of people. I knew I'd be letting down a lot of people. And I also knew if it was a really clear, intuitive calling coming from my wild soul, that I had to listen and that we would all be fine. The chips would fall where they may, and that we would keep going because that's what we do. And so that's that one. I cannot be worried about who other people want me to be or who I have been before. I have to keep moving forward and just trusting my intuition, honoring my wild soul every step of the way. Lesson number 8, for me, it was really realizing I'm a teacher at my core. And one of the ways we're restructuring the business is around an ever-evolving and expanding learning center. You know, there are certain things, you know, the deeper work that I do with people, teacher training, my mentorship, which I'm going to take a year off from, or working with private clients, which I have taken a year off from. You know, those things, because of the energy and concentration of time, the depth and the intensity of those things, I'm never going to be able to do those things at a discount, right? I can offer scholarships for certain things. We can do some work study stuff for teacher training, but some of the higher level things, energetically, it's never going to make sense to do them at a lower investment. And so it's important to me to build out a model where those of you who, for whatever reason, can't afford those things still have access to tons of useful tools and courses and experiences that you can navigate on your own that will really work for you. So as soon as this November, every year we love to do things on Cyber Monday, we're going to be releasing some new courses that are going to be way more affordable for way more of the community, the population in general. And yes, there will still be those higher level things, higher investment things rather as well. And I really want to correct that languaging. It's not that it's higher level, it's higher touch, right? Get touch meaning more time with me personally. But you all are so capable. This is another thing. This was another part of this lesson, is that empowerment is my jam. And one of the biggest elements of empowerment is self-trust. So like, I don't empower you. I can't empower you. You have to empower yourself. Many of you, I get beautiful messages all the time, how much you appreciate me. The podcast is changing your life. So many of you complimenting me, sending me these beautiful acknowledgments, and I appreciate it so much. And I'm always eager to remind you that all of the things that you see in me, you could not see if it was also in you. It's like the flip side of how people say, you know, when we judge other people or when we're triggered by other people because that thing is inside of us, it goes the same with like the positive triggers and admiration. So like really reflect on that, whether it's me or other leaders or influencers or whoever, authors, podcast hosts that you admire. You can make a solid list of all the things that you admire about us and go, damn, all those things are me too. I'm just seeing parts of myself reflected back to me. Maybe you're not expressing them yet, which is why you keep coming back to the podcast. You're learning, you're growing. But, you know, these are the things. And so when it comes to creating courses and an actual curriculum and a learning journey, right? So y'all, I'm getting serious. There's going to be prerequisites. There's going to be like 101s and 201s and 301s. Like, we're really going to dive into creating journeys and experiences for people that help them to progress and evolve. And it's not just like, here's another product, here's another program. Because, you know, I said this earlier, the impact is more important to me. And so that's what we're up to. And I'm excited for that. And I'm excited to just honor that that's who I am, how I am, and how I want to serve. Number 9 has to do with support and relationships, friendship, people on my team, asking for help, releasing people who aren't serving the path that I'm on, unconditional commitment to those who are part of my path, who are like bricks on my road. This was huge. So coming out of a relationship, and I know so many of you can relate to this because you've been through it. When you have a primary person, that person just naturally gets more of your time, effort, energy, attention, especially if you live with the person, which I did. And so when I came out of that relationship, it was, the amount of energy that like instantly came back to me moving into my own place, not having to be around this person every single day or most days, was a beautiful thing. But no one is an island, right? As much as I love my alone time, like I needed people. I needed to root into my friendships and really do an inventory of, who are my people in different categories and areas, right? Because like no one friend serves all the purposes, right? Like there are people I can jam on business with, but I can't go deep on like emotional things or spirituality. Like there's people who are so smart and they satisfy my need to really like geek out around certain things. But, maybe not, they're not that fun or funny or whatever. Like there's so many people are dynamic. Like we don't need each person to be all the things. We can really appreciate individuals for who they are and what they bring to the table. And so that is something I spent a lot of time on over the last year. And I know who my soul family is. And that doesn't mean that like more people aren't coming in or that I won't grow out of some of these relationships. But, there's just some people who are worth the fight. And realizing what that looks like for me and having just some of these unconditional relationships, like we're just going to be here for each other. And also like the pain, whenever you go through something big, a breakup, a death in the family, a personal experience, an illness, whatever it is, you realize who your real people are, who falls away and without judgment, right? It's not about like, oh, they suck. I got sick and they weren't there for me. It just wasn't your person. And so trusting that, surrendering to all that, so awesome. So awesome. And so, so much appreciation for so many people in my life and realizing that, it's just some people are worth the fight and some people aren't. We'll talk about that a little bit more. That's another point later on. Number 10. This feels uncomfortable to say. And I've said it. I usually say this and then I like put a little disclaimer on it. I don't want to have children. And I usually say, but I reserve the right to change my mind. But I really don't think I'm going to change my mind. And my friend Jen Blackstock, we'll put a link to this in the show notes, wrote a beautiful post about this recently. She doesn't want to have children either. And she got married last year. And so it was a big thing. Like when you're getting married, especially, it's like almost societally extra pressure. Like, well, in cultural mindset, if you're married, the next logical step is children. And so people, without meaning to put pressure on you or project their own expectations on you, they'll start asking, well, when do you want to have kids? And so, and all these things, or assuming like, oh, you'll change your mind. I've had people say that to me. I have this one friend. She's like, oh, you'll have kids. You'd be such a great mom. And it's like, but I don't want them. And when I say that, I want to be careful to be super considerate of those of you who like desperately want kids, like more than anything in the world, and maybe you're having difficulty with it, or maybe you're not able to give birth or whatever it is. And so some people take that as an affront, like my choice. And the thing is, I don't even know if I could have kids. Like I've never like gotten anything tested. Like maybe I wouldn't even be able to have them. I don't know, but I don't want them. And I'm clear in that. I'm comfortable in that. And I own that. And I also realized as I've come to really claim that this year, how uncomfortable it is to be a woman approaching her mid-30s who's really comfortable with not having a single desire to have children. And on top of, for the past year, not having a desire to like be in a relationship either. That makes people very uncomfortable. It's very weird for people because a lot of women my age are wanting partnership or marriage or children, like literally more than anything in the world. So to look at not wanting that and feel really okay with it has been an interesting part of the last year for me. 11, lesson number 11. This is a big one. The shadow side / the underbelly of self-help and personal development or spirituality, whatever you want to call this industry of transformation and incessant self-improvement. How I've participated in this, how I've been super complicit in this. And we have an interview coming up in a couple weeks with a woman named Andrea Renee Johnson. And she wrote this epic post about how the self-help industry is not changing the world. And it's just something that became glaringly obvious to me in contrast, because part of being with my former partner was moving to a community that labels itself as a conscious spiritual community, and realizing how some people really are. They're conscious, they're spiritual, they're awake, they're adults, they're integrated. And a lot of people really aren't. And again, there's no judgment for that, because there's so much work to do. Y'all, like, we have so much programming and so much conditioning that we're constantly undoing, which is why I do think we need this work. We need transformational work. We need healing work. We need energy work. We need spirituality. We need all of these things, because we come into this world untainted and we start getting tainted like right out of the gates. And so if we hope to dismantle that, or even just live happy, healthy lives, full lives, and enjoy ourselves, we got to look at that shit. But it could be more damaging than it is helpful in some cases. And so really deconstructing this, really looking at this, is something I've done a lot over the last year, and being able to process through some resentment for just how much money I have invested in coaches and healers and events and teachers, literally over $100,000 over the last 6 or 7 years, who even there, in some cases, stuff that I'm needing to unwind and unlearn. And so here's really the crux of the lesson. Anything that is rooted in having to place my power, my faith, or my belief in someone else's way that doesn't invite me to check in with myself and be in alignment and highest integrity with myself and my soul is not for me. And I think this is really, really big. Even anything where there is, I want to say, an undertone of righteousness, meaning like my way is the best way, that is a red flag for me. And listen, like, it's one of the reasons why the core of everything we do is everything you've ever needed has always been inside of you. And I'm quite sure that's the core of my work, because that's something I'm always going to be facing myself and looking at how, and this also relates to unwinding codependency, realizing how in some ways I became codependent on certain teachers in my life, even a coach that I worked with last year, how often I would reach out to her before I would reach in to my own self, or I would connect in with the divine in all the various ways that I do that. And even in some cases, even if my own guidance, maybe there are times when someone else's guidance might be better than your own, I still think the process of trusting yourself is about, maybe you get some outside counsel, and then you always run it by yourself. You're the first checkpoint for what you need. You're the last checkpoint for what you use. And so just cleaning up some areas in my own life where I needed to be even more committed to doing that. And in a lot of cases, ditching some old teachings I'd learned, distancing myself from people who do teach and lead in this way. That was a big, big lesson for me this year. Number 12, conversations are actually action because they have impact in one direction or another. And so, for a while, activism is something that has come more into the forefront of all of our awareness with the events in the world and with social media and people using social media as a primary platform to use their voices and do their activism. For a while, I would be triggered sometimes. Hang on, I need a drink of water. By people who were like all talk. And the reason I was triggered by that was really due to my last relationship, because I was with a person who, for the most part, was all talk. Mostly talk, very little action to back up the words. And it's hard. It's hard to be with someone who writes things on the internet all the time, and then you live with them and you see how they actually behave. You get jaded. And then when you live in a community where you see a lot of that as well. So I became a bit jaded. And I really became judgy, therefore, as well, that conversations or talking wasn't having an impact. And several months ago, I was listening to, I don't listen to a lot of podcasts, but I did catch an episode of the On Being podcast with Krista Tippett. She was talking to a poet, Marie, I don't remember if you pronounce her last name Howe or Howie, but I believe it's spelled Howe. And they were saying how words are action. Poetry is action. Books are action because they have an impact. And so the conversations that we're having, and I zoomed out, I looked at this on a larger scale. The conversations that we're having in our heads, the conversations we're having out loud with people, those are all having an impact on us and on others. And so conversations are action. They have an impact. So I'm not judging that anymore, but I am definitely being much more discerning about what conversations I engage in and what conversations I expose myself to. Number 13, this is super related to that because I have had to, in the last year, as I come even more into my own voice, my own values, who I am and what I stand for, had to up my willingness to be judged, misinterpreted, misunderstood, and projected upon. So earlier I was saying something how I get all these lovely messages from many of you projecting the beautiful qualities about yourselves onto me, right? Seeing the things in me that are in you, like just waiting to be expressed and to shine through. And likewise, that means that people are also projecting like their negative stuff onto me all the time. Like I'm triggering people constantly in one way or another, triggering people towards great and amazing things and progress, triggering people towards self-judgment, whatever it is. If I'm going to be in the role that I'm in, if I'm going to have a platform, if I'm going to use my voice, it's just like inevitable. I'm going to be judged. I'm going to be projected upon. People are going to misunderstand me. Even the other day I posted something on Facebook and Instagram that was basically inviting people to do their due diligent research before asking others to educate them. And on the smallest scale, this is about like simple things that you ask people that you can Google yourself, right? On the largest scale, it's things like, there's this beautiful Audre Lorde quote where she talks about, women are expected to educate men. People of color are expected to educate white people. Gay people are expected to educate straight people. And it's like there's emotional labor to that. And at the end of the quote, she says, we're better off finding our own solutions, right? Instead of constantly looking for other people to educate us. And so that's what that was about. And it's just so funny how some people really misinterpreted it. People took it as, don't ask anyone questions ever, figure everything out on your own. And that's not what I was saying. And so I can't be all up in the comments, like correcting people and being like, no, that's not what I meant, or this is what I mean, or you're taking it the wrong way. I literally just have to like let people have their own experiences. And so that is something that I think will always be uncomfortable because at our core, I think we all want to be like seen, heard, and understood. And we're just not going to be all the time. So lesson number 14 is, as I have committed myself to being more conscious and aware and threading, well, I'll call it activism for lack of a better term, but diversity, inclusivity, intersectionality, basic human rights into everything I do. It's a big commitment because we don't realize as well, like where we have internalized oppressive behaviors and methods and things in our marketing and the way we talk to people and the assumptions that we make about people. Like it's colored, it's painted everywhere. We have another amazing interview coming up in a couple of weeks with Sonia Renee Taylor. And she makes this great metaphor to it being like speaking French. She said, if you grow up in a house that speaks French, without studying French or without learning about French, you will naturally start using French words when you start speaking. And she's like, oppression, racism, white supremacy, it's the same way. If you grow up in a culture that is based in those things, you are just going to start speaking it and acting it out because it's in the culture. You're surrounded by it. And so through really educating myself and doing my best to get that shit out of everything that we do, there's all these interesting words used to describe that: activist, ally, all these things. And kind of like I was saying earlier about like the titles, I don't love titles, but I will say what I resonate with is being an advocate. I don't love the way the word ally feels. To me, it feels like it implies that someone or something is weak and needs saving. And I'm not here to save anyone. I can't save anyone. It's like empowerment. People can only save themselves. People can only empower themselves. But I can advocate for people. I can pass the mic. I can have people on my platform. I have access to spaces that some other people might not, right? Look at that Freudian slip. I almost said white not. Hello? This shit is real. And so I can advocate in these spaces. I can bring up conversations that aren't being had, that need to be had in spaces. I love that idea. That feels empowering, advocating. And so that really resonates for me. So I kind of identifying who I want to be and how I want to contribute to this massive movement that isn't new, right? And I'm like, late. Can we put in air quotes, late to the scene? I'm not going to say late. I'm new to the scene. And as I wrote in a post a couple months ago, I'm totally willing to mess it up on my way to getting it right. And I don't believe there is a such thing as getting it perfect. I think you get it better. You do better. We keep doing better, and those collective efforts add up for sure. Lesson number 15. Poetry is friggin' medicine. Medicine. So, I never was super, super into poetry before. I'm trying to think. I've always loved Rumi, but Rumi gets shared more as like quotes than full poetry, I guess. But in this past year, I started reading some poetry, and it just hits me in a way that other things, it's funny because poetry is comprised of words and expressed through the written or spoken word, but it hits me in a way that I can't even put words to. And I want to share, so this is one of my favorite poems, which many of you have probably heard before. It's called The Journey by Mary Oliver, and it relates to what I was just saying about I can't save anyone. She says, one day, you finally knew what you had to do and began. Though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles, mend my life, each voice cried. But you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do. Though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible, it was already late enough and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. Like, can I just press stop on the podcast? Do we need to say anything else ever again? So, again, that poem is called The Journey by Mary Oliver. We'll find a link and we'll put that in the show notes as well. But so that's it. Poetry is medicine. Just the way it washes me over, the truths that I'm able to access through the beautifully, artistically, and creatively crafted words of others is something that I had not super experienced in the depth that I have in the last year of my life. Number 16. This is a fun one. Like, I obviously wrote these out in very random order. And it's not like, this is kind of like an abrupt transition from like the beautiful poetry of Mary Oliver to narcissism, codependency, emotional abuse, and gaslighting are no joke. And And with the expansion of self-help and spirituality, narcissists, who are almost always also gaslighters too, because they can't see anyone's reality, right? So gaslighting is about denying other people's reality. Narcissists can't see other people's reality. They can't see beyond their own experience. So they're almost always denying your experience because they can't see it. And so we all gaslight people from time to time because we straight up don't understand, or we don't have the consciousness. Like we don't get it. We don't see it. But not all of us are narcissists. So narcissists have new tools. So my friend Terry Cole did a post about this, like spiritual narcissism. And so, this is the thing. There's a lot of leaders and teachers out there, influencers, brands, people who are very, very narcissistic, and they have all this training in language, in NLP, and in all these things. So their tools for manipulation are grander and deeper. This is how I stayed in a relationship for 2.5 years, because I truly thought I was with a person who was someone completely other than who they actually were. And I thought that eventually they would be the person that they put themselves out in the world to be. But this was real. Like, he used so many words to construct who he is on the internet and project a persona. And I believed in it. I saw the potential, and this will be the next lesson. We'll talk about this. And I know a lot of you can relate to the next one. But I remember one time this person even asked me, do you ever wonder, like, where's the guy who writes those posts? And I was like, yeah, all the time. And, it was obviously my own stuff. Like, part of this post was like codependency is a real thing. I was working out my own shit. And so that's why I never have any judgment. I recently had a client who is coming out of a relationship with a person, very narcissistic, emotionally abusive, or whatever. And it was outside of the scope of like the program she was in, but I was like, hey, like, call me. Like, let's just get on the phone later today. Let's talk about this, because this is something that I just walked through. And, afterwards she had sent me an email to say, thank you so much. It was so helpful to talk to someone who, without judgment. It's really easy to judge people from the outside when we don't know what's going on the inside. I had a lot of people after that relationship ended tell me, like, they were shocked. They're like, it looked so good online. I'm like, yeah, I know. And I believed a lot of things were real that weren't real. I didn't actually realize what was the truth until like 2 months after that relationship ended. So knowing these things has given me an enormous amount of compassion for anyone in any relationship, in any experience. Like, there's so many people in our lives. There's constantly people in our lives who are like, why are they doing that? Why are they still doing that job? Why are they still dating that person? Listen, we'll never know. And it's better to just support them and be there for them and not judge them, because when they're ready or when the time is right, like, they will be able to leave. So lesson number 17 is this: I cannot let the unearned benefits of the doubt I give people go unchecked. It's okay to give people the benefit of the doubt, but when someone shows me 2, 3, 4 times who they really are and how they really behave, I have got to no longer give them the benefit of the doubt. If I would have done that in my last relationship, that relationship would have lasted a couple of months, not a couple of years. My friend Laren Alta, who's also coming up, she'll be on the podcast soon. She talks about needing receipts, right? I need receipts in the form of action. My ex was always saying things that made it seem like he was doing his work and changing, but his actions, the way he treated me, that did not change over time. But I kept giving the benefit of the doubt, because, and here's the thing I know a lot of you can relate to, I believed in his potential. I saw the person he could be. I saw the person that I think he actually wanted to be, but he wasn't being that person. And I could not stick around for the treatment from the person who wasn't the person I thought he could be or would be or wanted to be. And this is really important for us. So many of us get involved with the potential of a person. And we give them the benefit of the doubt. We give them the benefit of the doubt. They're trying. But how are people actually showing up? It's really important. That's how we need to evaluate how we interact with them. And this goes back to something I said earlier about compassion and tolerance. I can have a ton of compassion for it, right? Like, I know I'm talking a lot in this episode about my former relationship, and I still, I don't have judgment. I used to have a lot of judgment, a lot of resentment, a lot of anger. And sometimes those things still stir up a little bit, but mostly I just have compassion for the both of us. It's who we were. It's where we were on our paths. We intersected for a reason. We both got a lot out of it in a variety of ways. And what I don't have to do anymore, though, is be tolerant. I don't have to make excuses for things. I can forgive, right? But I don't have to justify. And so these are big, big distinctions that are really helpful. I even had a friend recently, a friend in my life who I had to break up with because this person, he ghosts on people. It's what he does. And I knew this was his pattern. He'd done it to several other people, and then he did it to me. And at this point, it's like, again, compassion. I don't have any judgment for it. That's what you do, but I don't. I have so many rich, amazing relationships in my life. I don't have to make time and space for people who just aren't showing up the way they say they are. I don't have to be in the process of someone trying who never is actually doing, And I know that might sound harsh or dismissive, but that relationship was not one of those unconditional friendships. And some people, I said this earlier, are worth fighting for. And some people consistently demonstrate that they are not going to change. And then it's up to us to really take care of ourselves and have some standards. Lesson number 18, and this is where we'll end, because we are coming up on an hour now, so I will break this into 2 episodes. Oh my goodness, I learned an amazing lesson about objectification. So often we hear about objectification in terms of women being objectified, right? Turning our bodies into objects, or the trophy wife or anything like that. But I was at an event last year and there was a man talking about the way in which he had objectified all of his partners. So turned them into an object that would mean a certain thing for him, that would give him some kind of status, that would mean a certain thing for him, rather than being with a person, right? So objectification is also, there's an element of dehumanization to it. We're not seeing someone or treating them as a human. We're seeing them and treating them as an object. And so in my life previously, I had certainly experienced from a very young age tons of objectification around physical beauty, appearance, and attractiveness. But what I realized I had been experiencing in my last relationship was being an object of success and power. The person I was with never actually wanted to be with me, the full human Elizabeth D'Alto. They wanted to be in a power couple. There would be so many times in that relationship where I would say to this person, why? They were so critical of me. And during these times of being criticized or being compared to other women, this person is more beautiful, or this person's easier to be around, or her energy is this. And I'm like, great. Why are you with me? And they would say, you are the right fit for me. And I would hear that and spin my own codependent thing on it, right? Of oh, he loves me. He really cares about me. But no, I was the right fit into the image that he was working so hard to create and project out into the world. I fit that power couple dynamic that he wanted to be in. And I was like, got it. So my success is the object here. My power is the object here. Who I am and how I show up in the world is what's being objectified here. And it blew my freaking mind because I had just never, the only context I had ever understood objectification in before was physical beauty and attractiveness. So that was cool. That was really useful for me to see because again, and so many of these lessons point back towards I am a whole person and I have been leaning into, always constantly leaning into, right? Loving, trusting, accepting, respecting, honoring all parts of myself. And for people to be in my life, close personal relationships, that's a standard for me. They need to do that too. This is a place where I have a lot of boundaries, and there's a lesson down in the rest of the lessons here that we'll talk about boundaries, and that was huge. That was enormously important for me to realize. So y'all, thank you so much for listening. It feels great to share these lessons. I can't even tell you how many things that I've written in the last year that I haven't published because it just wasn't time, or it didn't feel right, or I was still so tender. It would have been really inconsiderate of my own energy and of my own healing process. So I hope any of that is useful for you as well. Obviously, I wouldn't share it if I didn't think it was useful based on, feedback and things that I hear from you all the time around what's going on in your own world. So if any of my points, if any of my lessons would apply to people share the episode. Again, it's episode number 189. The show notes will be at untameyourself.com/episode-189. So share this with your loved ones. If there's anything you think they could use, listen to it, come back, listen to it again. Find me on social media, Facebook or Instagram. Leave a comment on the posts. Let me know. What came up for you? What resonated for you? What can you relate to? We're all in this together, y'all. We need each other. And I get it. So that is, what was that? 18 of 33 lessons. I'll be back next week with lessons 19 through 33. And I'll be that much closer to being 34 years old. So thank you again so much for listening. We'll see you later.
So one of the biggest things that people say constantly is they'll say, "How are you?" And it doesn't matter if they're your best friend or a person you've never met who happens to know who you are in your story. Like, "How are you?" And you're like, "I'm good, pretty good today." And they're like, "No, but how are you?" Like the dentist lady scheduling my appointment last Tuesday. "I don't know you. I've never met you before in my life. How are you?" "Pretty good. I just got my teeth checked. All good. No cavities. A+. "No, how are you?" Are we doing this right here? We're scheduling an appointment,
Yeah.
But that's a constant thing. And in the beginning, particularly when you're fresh in grief, you don't even know the answer to that question. You spend all day going, "How am I? Am I okay? Am I going crazy? I'm horrible." You don't want to hear about how horrible I am. Can I tell you how horrible I feel?